G'day guys, and today it's time to talk about smoking in Australia, specifically the way the government fucks around with taxes and laws and things of that nature. So the legal status of smoking in Australia goes a little something like this. It's totally legal to go out and buy cigarettes, that's totally fine, no one cares. It is illegal to supply tobacco to people, so you can't grow your own plant without a license, and no one really pursues that license. Australia used to be a big tobacco producing nation a couple hundred years ago, but now it basically produces none on an industrial scale. There may be people producing it for their own commercial use, but that's of course illegal, and you can get thrown in jail for a minimum 2 years. The production and sale of nicotine is also illegal within Australia for use in things like vaping and things like that, although you can import it from overseas for personal use. That's totally fine. So a couple of years ago, the Australian government got on its head that it wanted less people to smoke. It wanted people to stop smoking. Now, there are many reasons for this, cigarette smoking, of course, being one of the highest causes of preventable deaths in Western countries. But I would argue, as I have argued in previous videos, that they did have a motive to relieve burden on the socialised healthcare system to avoid its immediate collapse. So, of course, they ran a lot of ad campaigns, things of that nature. But one of the key parts of their solution was to impose a rolling tax on suppliers. And that's not a reference to cigarette rolling itself, but it's in a tax that gets bigger and bigger every year. So they began to impose a flat tax rate on each individual cigarette. From March 1st, 2018, the current rate was about 71 cents per stick, per cigarette. And from September the 1st, 2018, it was increased to about 80 cents per cigarette. Now, 80 cents might not sound very much, but you do have to consider the effect on chain smokers or pack-a-day smokers. If you're going through 25 cigarettes a day, you're essentially giving $20 to the government every single day. The other tax they imposed was, of course, the aforementioned rolling tax, in which they were going to increase the price of cigarettes by 12.5% each year for 3 years until 2020. So if we have a look at the staple cigarette of Australia, the Winnie Blues, we can see that its starting price in 2017 was $29 a pack. This is all in Australian dollars. So with the rolling taxes, we're going to see it to increase to about $32.50, $36.7, and eventually $41.29 in 2020. So I'll throw up the exchange rates and let you have a look at prices in various countries, but as far as I'm aware, being a non-smoker and someone who hasn't travelled very much, this cost of cigarettes is incredibly high. This high price is, of course, down to taxes and regulation. If we have a look at the price of the Winfield 25 over the years, we can see that way back in 1989, it only cost you $2.66 to grab yourself 25 cigarettes. So now we've got a pretty good idea of how the government seeks to control this problem. There is, however, one aspect that they have refused to address, and that is nicotine vaping. Now, nicotine vaping sometimes falls into the same camp as marijuana, where people think it's totally fine for you, it cured my cancer, yada yada yada. While vaping nicotine isn't 100% safe, it is certainly safer than smoking cigarettes. Some people say 100 times more safe, some people say 1,000 times more safe. The key difference between smoking a cigarette and vaping is the lack of tar in the e-cigarette. Something else that you miss out on when smoking homegrown tobacco or an e-cigarette is many of the carcinogenic additives added to the cigarette to make it more addictive and a more pleasant smoking experience. However, I must reiterate that it is only a relative degree of safety. It is not 100% safe and risk-free. But this of course begs the question, why isn't the government promoting the use of e-cigarettes and the growth of home tobacco if it is at least safer than conventional cigarettes? The answer is actually in their solution. It's all to do with the money. Whilst the government has many taxes on the sale of cigarettes, it has comparatively less on the sale of e-cigarettes and their relevant products. If people switched from cigarettes to e-cigarettes, the government would lose out on millions of dollars of taxes. It would be compounded even further if people started growing their own tobacco at home, as it is even more difficult to extract money from someone who is basically just gardening in their backyard. The best they could do is force people to apply for a license, but then again, it's hard to catch everyone and such and so forth. The rolling tax solution actually works out quite well for the government, presuming it does cause people to stop smoking, as it lowers the burden on the healthcare system whilst also generating even more money for the government, which they can then throw away bombing people in foreign countries. However, if this solution doesn't actually stem the rate of smoking significantly, then the government will actually be fucking over the most vulnerable parts of our society. What will essentially happen is people who are less intelligent, have a lower social economic standing, will be forced to pay more. So of course, as I've said, if this doesn't actually decrease the rate of smoking, the government will just make poor people poorer. Good job. The treatment of smoking in Australia could actually be an interesting counterpoint to bring up to the socialists who argue that the free market only looks out for money and that they only churn people out for profit, they don't actually care about people, whereas of course the government has some sort of obligation to the people and blah 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 blah, like that. The truth is not so noble as we're seeing. The government of course needs to sustain itself, and it does this through revenue. There is a clear choice to be made regarding reducing the number of people smoking cigarettes. You can direct people towards growing their own tobacco and smoking e-cigarettes, whilst not safe, is certainly safer than smoking a cigarette, or you can take the less noble route, which is to tax people more for smoking, thus generating more money for yourself, whilst potentially not even solving the problem to the greatest extent it could be. So yes, of course, I support the full legalisation of nicotine products within Australia. I do believe we should be exploring every single option in the quest to stop people smoking, and we can actually do side-by-side comparisons. We can talk to people and say, hey look, we've increased taxes on cigarettes and we've also legalised nicotine products so you could smoke an e-cigarette. You get two groups of people. You get people who still smoke cigarettes but paid more money, and then you get people who stopped smoking cigarettes but started smoking e-cigarettes. Compare rates of cancer in a longitudinal study and you'll be able to work out which solution works best. Unfortunately, this idea seems a little too noble for the government, and they just seem to want to get as much money as possible. And again, this flies in the face of socialist rhetoric. Thanks all for sticking around, and have a good one.